The millionaire saw the cleaning girl play piano and was left speechless. The lights of the majestic hotel glittered like jewels in the New York night. The polished marble of the hallways reflected golden flashes, and the heavy silence of the early morning fell like a veil over the empty floors. However, something strange, almost magical, floated in the air that night. Daniel didn't usually leave his suite at those hours, but insomnia had pushed him to wander aimlessly through the corridors. He wore only a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar and dark pants, with his hair a bit disheveled and a lost expression. As he walked through the second-floor hallway, an unexpected sound stopped him dead, a soft and melancholic melody floating from the main salon down below. It wasn't music from a recording. Each note had a life of its own. There was something almost human in that interpretation, a delicate pain hidden between the keys, as if each chord were a whisper from a broken soul. Without knowing quite why, he went down the stairs, his steps barely resonating on the carpet. He approached the piano salon, with his heart pounding hard in his chest, and peered silently through the half-open door, and there she was. Sitting in front of the immense black grand piano, with the skirt of her grey cleaning uniform brushing the floor, was a young woman he had never noticed before. Her dark hair fell in a simple braid down her back, and her fingers danced over the keys with a naturalness that left him breathless. She had her eyes closed, completely surrendered to the music, unaware that someone was watching her. Daniel leaned his hand against the door frame, unable to look away. He had never seen anything so beautiful and so sad at the same time. It was a scene out of place, a scene that shouldn't exist, and precisely for that reason it was impossible to ignore. She seemed small under the immensity of the salon, but the sound coming from her hands filled every corner. The hanging lamps swayed slightly with the echo of the melody, and the air felt thick, charged with an inexplicable electricity. For a moment, Daniel forgot who he was, where he was. There was only music, and her. Suddenly, the young woman opened her eyes and saw him. The sound of the keys cut off abruptly, and her expression changed from reverie to terror in a blink. Like a child caught in a forbidden game, she slammed the piano shut, jumped up and lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured, her voice so low he almost didn't hear her. Without giving him time to say anything, she picked up her bucket and cloth and ran toward the side door, leaving behind a silence as heavy as the salon's marble. Daniel remained still, with the image of her fingers on the keys etched in his mind. He felt a stab in his chest that he couldn't explain. He didn't even know her name, but in that instant he knew something with absolute certainty. He needed to hear her again. And as the side door closed behind her, he whispered to himself, "Who are you?" The echo of his question was lost among the walls, while the hotel's silence swallowed every corner again. If you also want to discover how far such an unexpected and moving story like this can take you, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next chapters that will make you feel like never before. The salon remained empty, but the sound of the music still floated in Daniel's memory. He walked slowly to the piano, as if afraid to break the spell, and passed his fingertips over the closed lid. The cold of the black lacquer gave him back a bitter sensation. She was gone. For the first time in a long time he felt something different from boredom. The last time he had experienced something like this was perhaps in his adolescence, when he still believed that things could excite him. Since then, everything around him had been soulless luxury, endless dinners with strangers, false smiles from partners, the weight of a surname he hadn't chosen. No one ever asked him how he felt. No one ever asked him anything. The next morning, he sat alone on the hotel terrace, with his gaze lost in the courtyard. In front of him, a cup of steaming coffee and the monotonous sound of employees entering and leaving through the service door. He didn't see her among them, neither her dark braid nor her hurried walk, but he was sure she had to be there. Asking who she was would have been too easy. He could have called the administration and demanded a name. He could have ordered them to bring her, but something in her frightened look, in the way she had escaped like a wounded bird, told him he shouldn't. That morning he cancelled the meetings he had on his agenda. Something improper of him, and yet he couldn't find a reason to care. He decided to stay at the hotel, alert to any sign. That same night he went down again, to the same salon, hoping the magic would repeat itself. And it didn't fail. She was there, alone again, with the grey uniform and her hands on the keyboard. This time she didn't close her eyes while playing. She seemed more tense, more cautious, as if she feared someone would surprise her again. Daniel didn't want to interrupt her. He stayed in the hallway's shadows, watching. The notes came from her hands with such intense sadness it hurt to hear them. The piano was no longer just an instrument, but a refuge. Each melody spoke for her in a way that words never could. But suddenly, as if feeling his gaze, she looked up and saw him. A small exclamation escaped her, and she violently closed the piano again. This time she didn't flee immediately. She stood there, standing, with clenched hands and pressed lips, breathing heavily. He took a step closer, but she stepped back. "Please," she said, almost pleading, with bright eyes. "I won't play again. I won't do it anymore." Her voice trembled. She seemed terrified, as if she had committed an unforgivable crime. Daniel felt a stab of rage, not against her, but against the world that made her feel she had to hide to be who she was. He wanted to say something to calm her. He wanted to promise her there was nothing to be ashamed of, but instead of words, he only managed a clumsy murmur, "No, you don't have to." But it was too late. She had already grabbed her bucket and cloth, and was running toward the door, leaving behind a frozen silence and a closed piano. Daniel was alone once more, with empty hands and a chest full of questions. Who was that girl who transformed the night into music? Why was she hiding, as if having talent were a crime? What story was hidden behind that sad look? That night, sitting in his suite, he couldn't sleep a wink. And in the middle of insomnia, something ignited inside him, a new, irrepressible need. He had to find her. He had to know her. Because for the first time in a long time there was someone that made him feel alive. The next morning, Daniel descended to the lobby earlier than usual. He walked with his hands in his pockets, pretending interest in the newspapers, in the reception flowers, in anything, but really only looking for a trace. The cleaning employees came and went, dressed in the same grey uniforms. Most greeted him with a quick nod and lowered their gaze. None seemed to be her. He waited. He pretended to check his phone, sit on the sofas, order coffee, until finally he saw her appear. It was her, Isabella, though he still didn't know her name, entering through the service door with her head down and a small bag hanging from her shoulder. She wore her hair pulled back in the same braid, though a couple of strands escaped and framed her face. Daniel felt a strange impulse to go straight toward her, stop her right there and force her to listen to him. But something in her way of walking, hurried, evasive, with the weight of the world on her shoulders, made him contain himself. He followed her discreetly down the hallway. She pushed her cleaning cart to a wing of the hotel that was rarely occupied, and began her routine without even looking at him. He waited for her to notice him, but she never looked up. When he finally gathered the courage to approach, she was changing the sheets in an empty suite. The door was ajar. Daniel peered in, leaning against the frame. "Good morning," he murmured. She jumped, startled. The sheets fell to the floor while she looked at him with eyes wide as plates. "I didn't mean to scare you," he continued. "I just wanted to tell you that." She interrupted him with a slight shake of her head. She bent down, picked up the sheets and arranged them in silence. Without a word, she went around the cart and left the room, leaving him alone again. That was the first of several attempts. The following days, Daniel dedicated himself to finding her in different corners of the hotel. They crossed paths in the hallways, on the stairs, in the laundry, and every time he tried to start a conversation, she slipped away like a ghost. "Why do you run away?" he murmured to himself, one night, watching her figure disappear at the end of the corridor. But he couldn't give up. Not after what he had seen. One afternoon, he decided to resort to the receptionist. He asked her about the cleaning girl from the night shift, the one with dark hair and a braid. The receptionist looked at him with a mixture of surprise and distrust, but didn't dare refuse him anything. "Isabella," she finally said, like someone revealing an uncomfortable secret. "But I shouldn't, thank you," he interrupted her, with a slight smile. He already had a name, Isabella. The syllables seemed as sweet and sad as her music. That night, Daniel returned to wait for her by the piano salon. But when he arrived, the salon was in shadows, with the chairs stacked and the piano closed, mute. She wasn't there. For the first time in days, Daniel felt the cold of frustration chilling his bones. The salon's silence weighed more than ever. He walked to the piano, rested his hand on the lid and closed his eyes, evoking the sound of that first night when he still didn't know her name and she didn't fear his gaze. "Why do you run from me, Isabella?" he whispered. As if the echo answered him, the side door closed softly behind him, but when he turned, no one was there. Only the faint aroma of soap and dried flowers and the certainty that he had to keep trying. That night, Daniel decided to change his strategy. He didn't wait for her in the piano salon, nor try to follow her through the hallways. Instead, he sat on the terrace of the hotel's interior courtyard, right next to the garden she usually crossed every early morning when her shift ended. The breeze was cool, and the sky was studded with stars. From there he could see the moon's reflection in the central fountain. There was something intimate in that silent corner, as if it belonged only to insomniacs and restless hearts. Minutes passed, long, almost interminable, until he finally saw her. Isabella crossed the garden carrying a bucket with water, her hair disheveled from the effort of the workday. She walked quickly as always with her gaze fixed on the ground. This time Daniel didn't hesitate. He stood up and, when she was close enough, took a step forward. "Isabella." She stopped abruptly. The sound of her name on his lips made her tense as if they had just discovered her greatest secret. "Don't run away," he said softly. "I just want to talk to you." She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and distrust. Her dark eyes shone in the moonlight, full of something Daniel couldn't decipher, fear perhaps, or sadness. "Why are you following me?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I need to hear you again." The words left his lips without thinking. She lowered her gaze, shaking her head. "I can't," she said. "Of course you can." He moved a little closer, but she stepped back. "You play as if your soul were made of music. Why hide it?" Isabella closed her eyes for an instant, as if the words hurt her. "Because it's not for me," she answered, with a broken voice. "I only clean the floors. That piano doesn't belong to me." Daniel felt something inside him tremble. He wanted to tell her it didn't matter. That talent doesn't understand uniforms or hierarchies, but she was already turning on her heels, ready to escape again. "Wait," he said, almost desperate. "Just tell me one thing. Who taught you to play?" She stopped, but didn't turn around. After a few seconds her answer came floating between them, weak but firm. "My mother," and she kept walking, disappearing among the garden's shadows. Daniel stayed there, alone under the moon, with her answer pulsing in his mind like an unfinished melody. That night, for the first time in years, he felt small before someone, small and deeply moved. As he watched her disappear, a question burned in his chest. How many times in life do we hide for fear of shining? How many talents are lost in darkness just for fear of being seen? And you, have you ever felt that your talent doesn't fit in the world around you? Tell us in the comments, because this story is also yours. The following nights were different. Isabella no longer completely avoided him. She remained reluctant, with tense back and restless hands when he approached, but at least she no longer fled. Each encounter was a small step, one more crack in the wall she had built around herself. Daniel waited for her every early morning in the interior garden, always in silence, respecting her space. And she, little by little, began to stop for a few moments before continuing on her way. Sometimes they only exchanged a greeting, sometimes a few loose phrases, but one night she stayed longer. He found her in the piano salon, like that first time, sitting with her hands on the keys, without daring to press them. She was alone, believing no one saw her. He entered without making noise, and sat in a chair at the back. "I'm not going to interrupt you," he said, barely a whisper. She barely turned her head, surprised, but didn't get up. After a long silence, her fingers began to move, timid at first, then more confident, drawing out a soft and sweet melody. Daniel closed his eyes to listen better. Each note enveloped him like an intimate whisper, like a confession made in treble clef. When she finished, she remained motionless, with agitated breathing. "No one ever listened to me play like this," she admitted in a low voice. Daniel leaned forward. "Everyone should listen to you every day," he responded, with sincerity. She sketched a barely perceptible smile. For the first time since he knew her, he saw her smile. "I can't," she murmured. "I'm not that type of person." "What type?" he asked, confused. She remained quiet, searching for words. Finally, she sighed. People who deserve a stage. Her voice sounded sad, resigned, and something in her hurt Daniel more than he expected. Why do you think you don't deserve it? He insisted. Isabella lowered her gaze, her fingers playing with the edge of her uniform. Because what I do doesn't matter. I only clean what others dirty. That's all. Daniel stood up and walked until he was beside her. That's not true, he said, firm. You do more than clean. You do magic. She looked at him finally, with eyes full of a mixture of surprise and shame. Don't say that, she whispered. But he didn't withdraw his gaze or his conviction. I say it because it's true. For an instant, barely an instant, she seemed to believe him. That night, Isabella told him that her mother had been a piano teacher at a small conservatory. That as a child she had dreamed of being a concert pianist. That illness and debts forced her to abandon her dream to support her family. She spoke in a low voice, almost as if she was speaking to the piano keys more than to him. Daniel listened to her in silence, feeling that each word stripped her more before him, feeling that each confession made her more human. When she finished speaking, she softly closed the piano and stood up, ready to leave. But before crossing the door, she stopped and looked at him over her shoulder. Thank you, she said, barely audible. He smiled. Thank you. And for the first time he was certain she would return. The following nights became a silent ritual. Isabella no longer needed Daniel to look for her. She simply appeared, always at the same time, in the piano salon. He waited for her there, sitting in the shadows, sometimes with a forgotten glass of wine on the table, always with his eyes fixed on her from the moment she arrived. Each night she dared to play a little more, to let her fingers remember pieces she hadn't played since childhood. And each night, Daniel moved a little closer, until, inevitably, their worlds began to truly touch. One early morning, after a particularly intense interpretation, a slow, painful ballad that tore a knot from his throat, Isabella remained still in front of the piano, her hands still on the keys. Daniel approached slowly and leaned over her until he was beside her. The faint perfume of soap in her hair, the clear skin of her neck, the interrupted breathing, everything about her disarmed him. She looked up and for the first time didn't look away. You play as if you wanted to tear out your heart, he whispered. Isabella bit her lower lip. And you look as if you wanted to keep it, she responded, barely a thread of voice. The words remained floating between them, heavy and inevitable. Daniel slowly raised his hand, brushing one of her cheeks with his fingers. She didn't move away. Her breathing became slower, deeper, as if the air had thickened around them. The salon lights flickered softly, and silence surrounded them like a dome. He leaned closer, until his lips were barely a breath away from hers. But then a sound interrupted them, footsteps in the hallway, followed by muffled laughter from guests passing in front of the door. Isabella jerked away, as if waking from a dream. She stepped back, with her face flushed with shame, and something deeper, fear. No, she murmured, this isn't right. Why not? He insisted, trying to get closer again. But she had already taken a step back, covering her chest with her hands, with her eyes full of anguish. Because we're not equals. You, she swallowed, lowering her gaze. You are someone. I'm just the girl who cleans your floors. The words fell like a bucket of ice water on him. Don't say that, he said, with a low but firm voice. I don't care. But she shook her head, without daring to look at him again. I do, she confessed, before turning and rushing out of the salon. The echo of her steps resonated for a long time on the marble, while he remained motionless, with his hands hanging at his sides, feeling for the first time in his life what it was like to want something, someone, that seemed unreachable. Social differences, others' looks, the weight of prejudice, everything stood between them, like an invisible wall, and she knew it better than he did. Daniel stayed there, alone, with the closed piano, and the burning memory of the almost kiss that never came to be. And although every fiber of his body screamed that he shouldn't give up, something inside him understood that the distance between them was greater than he had imagined. But he also knew something else. He was willing to cross it, no matter the price. The following nights were hell for Daniel. Isabella didn't return to the piano salon. She didn't appear in the garden, nor in the hallway, not even during the early mornings, when he anxiously searched for her in every corner of the hotel. It was as if she had vanished. At first he thought maybe she needed time, that she would return.
But with each dawn, hope became thinner, like a rope about to break, until, one afternoon, he heard them.
He was in the hotel bar, with his back to the bar, when two guests, two elegant women, chatted without noticing his presence. "Have you seen the maid's face?" said one, laughing quietly. "She dares to let herself be seen with him, as if she were his equal." "Please," replied the other with disdain. "That type of girl always thinks a rich man is going to rescue her. What naivety!" The words hit him like a punch. He closed his eyes, feeling a rage boil that he didn't remember ever feeling. When he turned to face them, the women looked at him with horror and fell silent when they recognized him. But he didn't need to say anything. The hardness of his gaze was enough to make them lower their heads and move away. That comment, however, explained everything. The rumor had spread like wildfire. The inquisitive looks, the whispering behind his back, the veiled laughter. Isabella had been exposed, and she, proud and sensitive as she was, hadn't been able to bear it. That same afternoon, Daniel went to reception and asked to speak with the personnel manager. "I want to know why Isabella hasn't come to work these past days." The woman, uncomfortable, tried to avoid his gaze. "She requested a transfer, sir. She asked to be moved to another location in the chain. This morning she turned in her uniform." Daniel felt a cold emptiness in his chest. Where? To Boston. He didn't think twice. That same night he ordered them to prepare his car and left for the highway under the rain. The highway lights blurred behind the windshield while his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Images of Isabella succeeded each other in his mind. Her braided hair, her fingers dancing over the keys, her frightened eyes every time he tried to get closer, and the worst, her last look when she fled from the salon, convinced she could never be enough. He found her the next day at dawn in a small inn on the outskirts of Boston. The place's manager, after a few folded bills, gave him the room number. He climbed the stairs two at a time, with his heart beating at his temples. In front of the door he hesitated for an instant. He could leave her there and accept that what separated them was stronger than what united them. But then he thought about how she had made him feel that first night, when he heard her play by chance and something inside him awakened for the first time in years. He knew he couldn't give up. He knocked on the door once, twice. Inside, the sound of hesitant steps and the creak of the lock could be heard. She opened with loose hair, eyes swollen from crying, and an expression of surprise and fear. Daniel held her gaze firm. "I'm not going to let you run away again," he said, his voice low but charged with determination. Isabella stepped back, but this time she didn't close the door. He looked at her, and for the first time she didn't seem only scared but also tired. Tired of running. And in the silence of that small room, something between them changed. The room was full of silence, a silence so dense you could feel it on your skin. Isabella said nothing upon seeing him there, soaked by the early morning rain, with his hands still clenched as if he had come fighting against the entire world to reach her. "Leave," she murmured finally, almost voiceless. But Daniel didn't move. "No." She lowered her gaze, unable to hold his eyes. "You don't understand," she began, but he interrupted her, taking a step forward. "Yes, I understand," he said with dangerous calm. "I understand that you run because you're afraid. Afraid of what others will say. Afraid of me." She shook her head, the damp strands sticking to her face. "You don't know what it's like to be looked at as if you're worth nothing," she replied, her voice breaking. "You never had to earn your place in this world." Daniel let out a small bitter laugh. "Do you really think it's so different?" She looked at him, confused. "All my life," he continued, "I've been surrounded by people who see me only for my last name, for the money. Do you think that's love? Do you think I haven't felt invisible among the crowd?" Isabella blinked, surprised. "But she began, but couldn't finish. Daniel took another step until he was in front of her. "You're the first person in years who makes me feel real, who looks at me and doesn't see a last name or a bank account, just me." She closed her eyes, fighting against tears. "Don't do this to me," she whispered. "I'm going to do whatever I have to do," he said, and his voice sounded like a promise. "If the price of being with you is facing everyone around me, I'll do it. If I have to give up my last name, I'll do it." Isabella opened her eyes, astonished. "Don't say that," she whispered, but he nodded, with fierce determination. I'm going to prove to you that nothing and no one matters more to me than you." That same afternoon, Daniel returned to New York, but he didn't return to the hotel. Instead, he went straight to the family mansion. The enormous house received him with its accustomed air of cold luxury. His mother waited for him in the main salon, already informed of the rumors that were circulating. "So it's true," she said with disdain. "You've lost your mind over a servant." He looked at her fixedly, without a trace of doubt. "I finally found something worthwhile, and I don't plan to let it go." His father entered then, furious, raising his voice. "What will the press say? What will our partners say? You can't stain this family's name." Daniel stood up, his jaw tense. "I'd rather stain your name than live one more day being the perfect son you expect," he said, his voice firmer than ever before. He turned on his heels and left without looking back. Upon leaving to the garden, he breathed deeply, feeling a strange peace running through his chest. For the first time in his life he had spoken with his heart. The next day, he returned to Boston. He knocked on the inn's door, and when Isabella opened, there was no longer anger in his gaze, only a new sweetness, charged with something impossible to ignore. "I faced everyone for you," he said, with a half smile. "Now you don't have to run." She looked at him, incredulous, but in her eyes shone a small flame, like an ember that hadn't completely died out. And without saying anything more, she let him in. The room was warm, bathed in the orange light of sunset that filtered through the window. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, with her hands intertwined in her lap. She still couldn't look him in the eyes. Daniel leaned against the wall facing her, with his arms crossed, giving her space to breathe. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, after a long silence. "I just want you to listen to me." She barely lifted her gaze. "All my life," he began, "I felt surrounded by luxuries and empty inside. Everyone tells me what I should do, how I should behave, who I should talk to. No one ever asked me what I wanted, until I heard you play." The words broke a little, but he continued. "That day, I felt like someone was finally speaking to my soul. That person was you." She swallowed, visibly moved, but still fighting with her own fears. "But I don't fit in your world," she whispered, almost like a child afraid to confess their dream. "I don't fit in my world either," he replied softly. "Maybe that's why I found you. Because I needed someone to remind me who I really am." Daniel knelt in front of her and took her hands in his. Isabella didn't withdraw them. "You're afraid," he said, "and so am I. But I swear that if you let me, I'm going to prove to you that you deserve every stage, every applause, every note that comes from your hands." For the first time, she sketched a small smile, timid but sincere. "I'm not as brave as you think," she murmured. "Then let me be brave for both of us," he responded. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. They looked at each other for what seemed like hours, until finally, she tilted her head and closed her eyes. Daniel embraced her slowly, feeling how her body, at first rigid, gradually loosened in his arms. In that instant, he knew it didn't matter what the world thought. Neither his last name, nor the murmuring, nor the social differences. Nothing had weight when she was with him. And while he held her close, a single idea crossed his mind. How many times in life do we have the opportunity to feel something so pure? If this story has also made you feel that in love, there are no barriers or prejudices that matter, don't forget to give it a like right now, so more people discover that sometimes miracles begin with a simple melody. When their lips finally met in a soft kiss, Isabella let out a sigh she had been holding for years. Daniel kissed her with the delicacy of someone who knows they hold something fragile and valuable in their hands. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and for the first time, looked at him without fear, with eyes full of hope. That night, in that small inn between worn sheets and the distant murmur of Boston's church bells, something stronger than any social barrier was born, a silent promise, sealed between two souls that had finally found each other. The lights of the great hotel salon shone like never before that night. The stage was prepared for a charity evening, with guests from all over the city. Impeccable suits, glittering jewelry, champagne glasses, and an immense black grand piano in the center of the room, waiting for the night's performer. Daniel, standing by the doors, adjusted his tie knot, and searched with his gaze among the crowd. There she was. Isabella entered slowly,
wearing a simple ivory dress that fell over her shoulders like water. Her hair, loose for the first time, framed her face softly. There was something different in her bearing that night, a serenity that no one in the room could ignore.
People looked at her with strangeness, some with disdain, others with curiosity, but she no longer cared about the looks. Daniel went toward her and extended his hand. "You're ready," he said, with a serene smile. She looked at him for an instant, unsure, but then nodded and intertwined her fingers with his. Together they walked toward the stage. The public's murmur gradually faded until only the sound of their steps on the platform remained. Daniel accompanied her to the piano bench and stayed by her side while she sat down. "I won't leave you alone," he murmured, gently squeezing her hand before stepping away and staying in a corner watching her. Isabella took a deep breath and rested her hands on the keys. For an eternal second, she closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes filled the salon with such immense sweetness that no one dared to move. Each chord floated in the air like a contained sigh. Each melody drew out hidden emotions in the hearts of those who listened to her. It was impossible to imagine that this girl, once condemned to clean the floors of that same place, was now there, transforming the night into magic. Daniel didn't take his eyes off her. In his eyes there was pride, tenderness, and love. When she finished, silence lasted barely a second before breaking into deafening applause. Isabella looked up, surprised by the ovation. The crowd was standing, applauding, some with tears in their eyes. She stood up from the bench and looked toward him. Daniel went up on stage, took her hand and before everyone, pressed her against his chest. Isabella smiled, a timid but radiant smile, and he tilted his head toward her, whispering in her ear, "I told you, you deserve this, and more." She closed her eyes and for the first time in a long time believed in her own hands, in her own voice. There in that instant, she knew she was no longer the girl who hid in the shadows to play a forbidden piano. Now finally, she had allowed herself to shine. And while people continued applauding, Daniel raised her hand intertwined with his so everyone could see her, not as a servant, not as someone who didn't belong, but as his equal. She returned his gaze, grateful, because in the end, it hadn't been him who had rescued her, they had rescued each other. Sometimes miracles come disguised as people willing to listen to us when we most need to be heard. And if you want to keep living stories that remind you that love knows no barriers, don't forget to subscribe right now so you don't miss the next ones. Because maybe one day you'll also get to live your own melody. The ovation continued while both left the stage, hand in hand among applause and golden lights, with light hearts and the certainty that they had found a home in each other. A home they never planned to give up.